I'll just give everybody a few minutes to continue to log in. We're pleased to have you here at the Bath Digital Festival event. I'm Sean, I'm entrepreneur in residence at Set Squared Bath, working in the Advanced Engineering Business Acceleration Hub, which is a 3-year program providing business support for startups, SMEs within the West of England. My background is in product development and innovation, and this morning we're going to explore the future of digital technology in advanced engineering and product development. And along the way, we will hope to discuss how new digital product development tools and technologies are transforming the way startups, SMEs, and global companies are conceiving, developing, and building products and services. Before we get into it, if you have any questions, then please feel free to drop those into the Q&A section, and we'll do our best at the end of the session to answer those questions for you. I will just move over now and stop sharing the screen. And I'm pleased to be joined by Kate Dowler. Kate is one of the co-founders of Industry of Us, an innovation consultancy based in Bristol, but operating globally. Industry of Us was founded in 2019 with the aim of helping companies and individuals innovate better, both in terms of the quality of ideas, but also the ability to progress new ideas, concepts, and business models through the organization. And joining us as well, we have Mark Bale. Mark is a physicist and director of .Exact Limited, a technical consultancy based in the Southwest, helping organizations of all sizes across the globe maximize their potential in inkjet-based developments. And last but not least, we've got Phil. Morning, Phil. Phil Walsh is founder of Sphere Product Design, and Phil has over 20 years experience developing industrial, medical, and consumer products from concept through to manufacture. So welcome, everybody. Hope we can have an enjoyable discussion this morning, covering lots of interesting areas around digital technologies. So, Kate, can you introduce IOU?
Yeah, of course, Sean. I'll just share my screen actually, so we can. I've got a few things to share, so I'll do that. So hopefully you can all see that.
Yep.
Brilliant. So yeah, as Sean mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Industry of Us. We do operate very much at the front end of the innovation process, and really what we try and do is help innovators. And that could be anyone from an individual to a startup to a large global brand. So we really work at lots of different levels and scales. And I guess what we're really trying to do is help people work out what is it they should be doing in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of products, services, business models. So really looking for what are the big opportunity spaces for my business, and what are some of the early ideas or concepts that we could generate within those spaces. So out of the different panelists here today, I'm very much representing the very front end of the innovation journey. So in terms of this topic, it's all about digital, and I guess there's quite a few areas that we operate in terms of what we do and how we work. And first of all, can I just check you can all see my screen, by the way? Is it still working? Cool.
Yeah, it's good.
First of all, so insight is one of the key areas we work in, and there's lots of digital tools and applications in that area. So when I say insights, what I mean there is really helping understand the user, the consumer, and looking to identify big unmet needs or future spaces that we could be working in that would add value to the user. So digital is really interesting. So historically, people would have spent a lot of time doing sort of focus groups, face-to-face interviews. And what's really happened, especially with COVID at the moment, is that everything is now done digitally. So there's many different tools out there, from online communities, online surveys. This image here is a nice one of a mobile ethnography app, which is a really clever way of getting consumers to sort of feedback on little tasks in real time. So you basically design a short set of tasks for them to do in their own time, and it includes clever functionality like sort of geolocation capability. So if they're out and about in a particular store, it might trigger an alert or a survey or something for them to do in that space. And we get very rich content from that, very, very rich videos, photos, really nice in the moment contextual insight. So that's a really great space for us. We also do a lot of work in concept testing, which is the next area along, where we're looking to explore early ideas with users and consumers. And that can be quite hard to do actually when you're working with very early stage ideas, which are hard to bring to life quickly. So again, digital has a huge role to play here. Everything from 3D printing, which Mark will talk about later, through to virtual and augmented reality to really bring ideas to life in a very immersive way, even if they're very, very early stage concepts. This image here is a really nice concept testing platform called Swarm, which is it's basically a group of people online, so maybe 10 to 20 people get presented with a question, and it's a very interactive method where they each basically drag the puck that you can see in the middle there towards the answer that they feel represents their opinion, and it basically uses crowd wisdom to basically give you an answer to your question. So it's again quite engaging for the user, and a nice way of using digital technology to really understand different ideas, different concepts. And then finally, collaboration is really key. So a lot of the work we do is around working with clients, with project teams to come up with ideas. And again, in the past, we do a lot of face-to-face, one-day workshops or sessions, which are fantastic. But everything is moving online, and we'd already started doing a lot of virtual collaboration before COVID, but now everyone's doing collaboration with different digital platforms. So there's loads of different tools out there like Miro and Mural that allow us to collaborate together virtually. And there's loads of interesting things you can do with those platforms, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later as we go through the talk. So that's a brief intro to Industry of Us and how we use digital technology within our work. So I'm sure we'll touch on some of these topics again a bit later.
Thank you, Kate. Phil, can you tell us a bit about Sphere, what role digital technology has in the work you do?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so as Sean has introduced, my name is Philip Walsh, and I'm a product design engineer. I've worked in product development all my career for a range of different businesses, but I've recently set up Sphere Product Design. One of the reasons for that is so that I can actually get back to doing design work rather than hands-on innovation, rather than actually running teams of people. I tend to develop physical products for the medical, industrial, and consumer sectors, and typically I bolt on to sort of the end of Kate's work and pick up innovations and ideas, and then take them all the way through from concept all the way through to a manufactured product. Sphere Product Design is relatively new and quite young, and the projects that we're working on at the moment are all still in development, so they're secret, they're not in the public domain yet, so I'm unable to share them. But I can share this is a project that is in the public domain, and has that come up?
Yep.
Yep, that's sure. So this project is in the public domain. It's quite an old one now, but it does clearly demonstrate the kind of skills and the projects that we get involved with. I mean, I personally have about 20 years experience in product development. It's across the medical, consumer, and industrial products and packaging, and it can be from innovation right the way through to manufacture. The product you can see in front of you is a nuclear generator that we developed for GE. And this did go all the way from concepts right at the beginning, some consumer research at the very beginning, then concepts, and all the way through development to manufacture. And you can see in the top picture there, the parts rolling off the production line. What was really challenging about this is that there was a whole load of different constraints from different areas, and the product itself, you can see, is relatively complicated. There's a lot of consumer and user needs in there, and how you handle a nuclear generator, which is also a medical device. It's a good example of the CAD systems that we use and the kind of images that we can create and the complexity of the designs that we can create. And of course, this is 15 years old, this product now, but so CAD has always been a core part of what we do. So that's a good example of the kind of things that Sphere would get involved with. In terms of this discussion and what else we use in digital technology. As I say, CAD has always been a very core part of what we do, and we've used CAD tools for many, many years. But more recently, I think there's many more tools, and the amount of digital technology which has impacted more aspects of the design process. So picking up on what Kate said, collaboration is absolutely key. We collaborate so much more with the teams that we work with. The fact that you can share desktops is wonderful, but the fact that we can work on the same desktops together on the same systems, I think is extremely powerful. So we don't have to be together, but we can also access people and skills from around the world and have much more richness of people working on projects. I think cloud storage had a massive impact as well. So the way that we document everything, we store everything in the cloud, but that now gives us access to everything. So more people can collaborate, more people can be involved in the process. It also means that we have more of an opportunity to create one version of the truth. When we're developing products, you generate a lot of information. So everyone can access the right level of information at the right time, and that's very important. And the final thing I think that's really impactful over recent years is prototyping. And it's not just 3D printing. There's a lot to be said about 3D printing, and I think Mark's going to come on to that in a minute. But digital technologies have really impacted the way that we make all sorts of prototypes. We can make rapid injection mold tools in days now rather than weeks and months. We can make tooling for other manufacturing processes, such as carbon fibers or vacuum forming. So we can prototype things much more quickly because of the digital technologies that we have. And I think all these digital technologies have come together to actually impact all aspects of product development, and they kind of reduce risk in the process. They continue to compress time, which is just what everybody wants, is to get everything faster and quicker. But also I think that because of a lot of the work that Kate does and the way it feeds into the process, it means that a lot of the products that do work now are far more relevant for users and for the businesses, and much more powerful going forward. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Phil.
I'll just hand back over.
And Mark, could you tell us a bit about your work and the role digital technology plays?
Hi. Yeah, good morning. And absolutely. So I kind of follow on from the two previous people who've introduced their services and companies. And I also have a slide to share, so I'll just switch to that. So my business, DoD Exact, specializes in digital printing, and most specifically, as indicated by the company, drop-on-demand inkjet printing. So the surprising thing about it gets hidden away in a wide variety of big products that we buy today. And so it's not just a method for realizing designs, it's out there manufacturing things that we all effectively take for granted, but enabling a lot of the concepts that Kate especially talked about in terms of bringing new things to the consumer market. So as an example of my background, I've worked on everything from printing TVs, the top left here, all the way through CMYK printers that print graphics onto corrugated labels, billboards, building wraps, car wraps, all that sort of stuff that it's not pretty to look at. But ceramic tiles is one of the most successful digital printing markets there has been in terms of conversion from analog print processes. And even the photovoltaic cells that you can buy and put on your roof and potentially benefit from the digital processes that are now available in terms of improving efficiency. Today, we've heard a couple of times about 3D printing. And since starting my company 3 years ago, I've been involved more in 3D printing than I was previously in my career. And because I'm an inkjet specialist, for me, that it actually focuses on two things, which are a little schematic at the bottom tries to show. So 3D printing using inkjet really either prints into a bed of powder, like this schematic shows, so you're printing a liquid to glue particles together, or it's actually direct writing a design. So most people are familiar with hot filament FDM machines, which are effectively extruding plastic to build up layers. In inkjet, you do that with liquids that you're printing across a gap. And an example of what you can produce are these complicated shapes that are built up. But it's actually the technology that enables all that is a coming together of the mechanics of the system and the software, which is all enabled by digital. So the images themselves have to be prepared in thousands of layers and managed digitally. And these days, a lot of that's done on the cloud, like we've heard about. So in my job, I help people build the machines and understand how to fire the liquids that enable all these kinds of applications. And that's it. So
Great, thank you, Mark. That's really interesting. Thanks for those introductions. And it's clear that you're all working in separate stages of the process. And what I'm interested in is that human interaction, and has the technology remove the need for that? Maybe Kate, you could pick up on that, and then we could just discuss that between the panel.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, Sean, because I suppose with so much of the technology that I talked about earlier, so much of it can be automated and done via clever online platforms and tools. I think a couple of things I think where it really adds value. The first one is probably around allowing, I suppose, freeing up the time for the human interaction to be much more focused and much more in depth, and really adding value. So I suppose the great benefit of a lot of the digital technologies is they make the whole process so much more efficient in terms of data capture and analysis. But it means that you can really focus your time on exploring a couple of interesting themes or areas of the project that you can actually focus on. So I think focus is really key. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that I suppose there's a temptation to view AI and other technologies as, I suppose, replacing the need for humans to do certain tasks. But there's a huge value in using it more as a tool, I suppose. So in the work that we do, which is all around creativity, AI tools can really help to generate new thinking. So they're almost there as a way of throwing together interesting combinations of ideas. So often allowing us to think or imagine things that we hadn't thought of. So I suppose it's complementing, I suppose, the human side of creativity. So I think there's a huge amount of value, and it's giving us more chance to focus on the areas that are more valuable, more interesting for us as humans.
Would you agree, Phil, with that? Is that how you see it? Is it about that efficiency or of time?
Yeah, I think so. I think what's really interesting is that many of the projects that we do, there's been this big transition to Zoom at the moment, and everyone's getting quite familiar with Zoom. I think the people who benefited very well from that are people who are established in businesses and are able to rely on the relationships they currently have. I think I'm interested in, Kate, is how do you form new relationships when you can't do it face to face? We're all human beings, and that face to face contact and seeing your face and your expressions. And it's great that we can do it this way. It's so much better than it was 5 years ago. But still, actually making those particular connections when you're not in the same room, I think is quite challenging. And I think, as I say, I think you're very expert at this, and it's interesting to know how you make new connections with new people with the digital technologies like this.
That's a really good point. I definitely agree that when you're looking to develop that sense of group cohesion and rapport, it is a lot harder to do that on Zoom and other platforms, because you not being in the same space, that sense of energy and focus is actually a bit more difficult, more challenging. So I definitely agree there are challenges, but I also think like the global reach that we have, and a lot of the work we do is with people all around the world, and just being able to sort of quickly chat to someone in Japan or US, and to do that all virtually and very quickly, there's a huge amount of benefits as well. So yeah, I think overall, I think that the benefits for the way we're working anyway definitely sort of outweigh the challenges.
Yeah, to pick up on what you said there, Kate, actually, when I was printing TVs, and it's nigh on 15 years ago that I left that job, we were doing regular teleconference calls. We'd sit in a conference room, we'd all gaze at a TV, and the team in Korea would do the same. And you could develop some rapport, but it was quite stilted. And I think what the more recent digital tools allow is for that actually to become much more of a one-on-one relationship as required. And the tools have developed to allow, breakout or table networking events I've done, which is just astonishingly close to what a real event works like. You go sit down at a table, you spark up a conversation. And I work in R&D, so that means that all the collaborative human aspects of coming up with a new thing and making it work depend on those relationships and on that communication. So the tools have helped enormously to keep that going.
I mean, it's interesting, just moving on from that and talking about collaboration and sharing. I think from a relationship building and working in R&D teams, clearly that's a challenge with new relationships, but with established ones, it's a degree easier. But I'm interested in, Phil, going back to your world of CAD and engineering and that collaboration and sharing aspect, how that works today in that virtual digital environment, and what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks. It's interesting, wind back a number of years, and I would spend time traveling to a tool maker or an injection molder, and you sit around a table and you inspect and measure first off samples off an injection molding machine, or you review a tool. How have things changed, Phil, in that space in terms of the collaboration and the sharing aspect?
I think what's really interesting is that the face-to-face stuff is very valuable, but it's very expensive, and typically it would be potentially just yourself going to view a tool maker or something. But now, with the formats that we're sitting on right now, we can connect up so many more people. So it's not just one engineer or two engineers going to view a facility. So we were recently just doing a tool review, and we had about 15 people on there, because it wasn't quite a tool review, it was more reviewing some injection molded parts as they first came off, but there's quite a few interested people, and it engaged more people into the process. And I think what's really interesting is that the more people that engage with the process, the more understanding they have of the developments that they're involved with. So I think that's what these tools allow us to do, is to collaborate more widely with more people within the development process. I also think that part of this, the other part of the question was about sharing and things, is that we collect a lot of data together, and the fact that we can store it in a single cloud-based space now and allow access to it from various people allows those collaborations to again broaden and be wider. And I think that obviously with collaboration, the great benefits of the more ideas you get, the more engaged you get, and the more buy-in you get from more people within the development process. And that's really important. It reduces the risk of development. Development is risky and expensive, and the more people we can get to collaborate and be involved in it, I think we can reduce risks and increase the likelihood of success of a development. I think we are generating so much more information, so much content, and I think one of the challenges is how do we access all of that and get to the right information historically as we go forward, because everyone's producing so much stuff all the time in so many different formats on Teams and notes and things. I think it's very important to structure your information so you all get access and find what you want when you want it, and also scheduling. As I say, we can all pop onto these meetings like this, but when we've done dozens of these over months and months, it's very difficult to go back and find things. So making sure that you schedule regular meetings with people, I think, is also very important, and regular touch points so that you can get the right people in the right space to make the right decisions. So I do think that we can almost get overwhelmed with the amount of information and the amount of collaborations that we can have. At the end of the day, we need to get that succinctly down to a solution at the end. I think the end of your question was about challenges. I think the challenges is a bit that we started to talk about a little bit earlier. It's about relationships. At the moment, some of the projects I'm working at the moment, I'm well established within the team. I know people, I've met them face to face, and it's so easy just to pop on and have a quick chat with them. It is much more difficult, and it's part of your character. It's part of history and everything, but it can be more difficult to get to know people and work well with people in these through digital things. But I agree with Mark. There are so many tools, even with the tool we're using today, it has made massive progress in that.
And Mark, do you have anything to add on that in terms of the collaboration and the sharing aspects?
Yeah, well, my experience actually recently has been that meeting new people, which is always a necessary part of running a small business that requires you to go in and out of projects all the time, like mine does, has proven more doable than I thought. For example, it's quite weird. The other day I was asked to do a panel in a conference in the US, and then I met a guy, and it turns out he lives 10 miles away. And it's a crazy world. So those things can happen. And sometimes what people say about the inkjet world that I work in is that it's quite small and everyone knows each other. I don't think that's true when you include all the multinationals and everything. but it can be surprising sometimes when that happens. But it's when you meet a new person, it's how well you can engage with them over online compared to face becomes whether you can convert that into a client, whether you can form that bond of trust that is so important to taking that relationship forward. Because almost straight away you're into a discussion where people will want to think about signing NDAs. And in my business, I don't really do a project without signing an NDA, because what's being produced is something that's to that company so important to their sales in the medium to longer term that they are, really trying to protect it. And I'm sure that's common to a lot of us who are working on market sensitive stuff. So it's one of the things that's quite useful is the fact that you can do that stuff online now. So you can sign a disclosure agreement or a contract completely online without having to send copies to every party by courier or whatever. And that makes the start dates a lot easier because you can all sign them on the same day. So that's one advantage that I hadn't really thought of before that's really really helping.
And just moving on in terms of, we touched on prototyping, and maybe Mark, you can pick up on this, and then others can come in. It's moved on a lot, and if you look at some of the projections, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and prototyping is set to grow and revolutionise, if you believe what you read, the UK manufacturing landscape with digital 3D printing farms that are replacing traditional manufacturing. But in terms of prototyping, that digital prototyping, how things changed, and where are the advantages, and where do you see it going?
Well, there's a lot of 3D printing services, companies that have sprung up over the last 10 years or so. It used to be quite a niche area. Usually the tools were done with light, and now they're done a lot more like lasers, and now they're done a lot more with inkjet. So one of the things that I've seen in my business is a predominance now for getting multi-materials or varied properties in a single part within the same layer. Inkjet is a technology that can enable that in ways that selective laser sintering, for example, can't. And when you look at those technologies of printing, and one of the most common ones, SLS, is actually responsible for those parts that go into BMWs, all those parts that go into Airbus. They're making metals by effectively melting metal particles together using high power lasers. But what that means is you've only got one material. And now we see a trend to printers that can deposit in the same layer different materials and combinations of them, which then gives your part something other than just a shape. It gives it a functionality. And it's that functionality that is revolutionizing prototyping and will ultimately make it viable to make manufactured parts which have different types of components. And footwear is often mentioned for that. A lot of that so far has been midsoles, because basically TPU and compressing is enough. But try and make an upper. The degree of flex needed for that and the strength is beyond the realms of current 3D printing technology, but it's what people want to do. They want to be able to replace a stitch for holding together different types of material. And, threads have been developed for a long time to be strong when you stitch them nicely. To replace that with something which just sticking together by innate, mixing of materials is actually quite hard. So, but we're seeing it happen. But prototyping isn't just about 3D, of course.
No, of course. No, I mean, and that's interesting in terms of, Kate, your world, prototyping. What does that mean in the space that you occupy, that front end part of the process?
Yeah, it's a key part of how we work. So because a lot of the work we do is very iterative, and within the design thinking sort of methodology, it's all about bringing things to life, bringing ideas to life really early so they can be explored with users, with consumers, and then iterated again. And one of the challenges historically has always been, like, how do you bring something to life in a meaningful way that can really convey the properties of that concept, of that idea. So I think all the different technologies that we have available now, the more digital technologies, really allow that to happen, I suppose, quicker and in more interesting ways as well. So I suppose being able to 3D print something quickly is a way of, if you're talking about a physical, tangible product or pack, there's different printing technologies that can allow you to very quickly simulate or to bring something to life. And then also the more, as I mentioned earlier, the more virtual reality or augmented reality, there's things we can do there as well now to create, I suppose, an immersive experience and put someone into that experience so they can imagine what that concept could be like. And that's really useful for more futures-based work where not only the product is new, but the environment or the context is new as well. So I see there's a really interesting space there that will evolve quite a lot over the next few years in terms of how we help people imagine the future and then test ideas and concepts within that environment. So yeah, I'm quite excited about what's going to be possible and how these technologies are going to evolve in the future.
And that's using consumers to help you co-create ideas and experiences.
Yeah, so very much, users and consumers, we often bring them into the creative process at different points to feedback on ideas, concepts, and there's benefits and drawbacks of doing it more virtually. So I suppose with physical packs and products, you can get very hands-on. You can really get the sensory experience, and I suppose you lose some of the haptics potentially if you're moving more online or virtual. But then there are really clever technologies around that as well. So we've got good friends at Ultra Haptics in Bristol who are doing very clever work around how you simulate that haptic experience with technology. So there's loads of interesting things out there which will help us bring ideas to life early and in a really interesting way, to really explore them with consumers. So I think that'll be a really exciting space.
And Phil, in terms of your the space you occupy, I guess you've touched on it. It's key. Prototypes are part of the process, and that, as Kate mentioned, that iteration is also crucial.
Yeah, I think it's interesting touching what Kate mentioned there. At the front end, when things are in a virtual space, when we're developing things in CAD models, the CAD software is advancing at a huge pace at the moment, or continuing to. And the fact that you can do fly-throughs and renders, and you can put as Kate suggested, you can stand yourself in the middle of an object and you can look around and you can see it. And you can use virtual reality as well. And we're starting to see over the last few years virtual reality headsets where you can actually pick up with a glove and you can pick up parts of a car, for example. You can move a part over there and you can actually deconstruct the 3D models using different ways of interacting with CAD. I think what's interesting with computer-aided design tools is that they tend to have come from a very technical aspect, and they take quite a lot of skill and experience to use them and to get the best out of them. I think what's interesting is how those user interfaces are going to change over time and are continuing to change now. As I say, you're starting to use virtual reality, so you don't have to be clicking a mouse and really understand all of these different tools to be able to design something in 3D CAD. You can actually, put a helmet on and actually design something as you would as a designer, trying to create what you want to create. But that also means that we can interact with people. We can make prototypes virtually. We can interact with people on the screen and in the CAD model before we get into the real world. And then building a little on what Mark said, the things that 3D printers can do now are amazing. So, but what they also do is that digital data can be used to make other things as well. So we don't just need to 3D print something. We can actually make tooling very, very quickly as well now. I think I mentioned that earlier. But we can also 3D print tools and injection mold into 3D printed tools. So again, we can get to prototypes very, very quickly. And all of those processes are moving forward at quite a pace, all backed up by this sort of progression of digital technologies.
Yeah, one of the biggest markets of 3D, or one of the bigger markets in terms of tooling, is binder jetting that actually binds sand together to make molds for metal casting.
Well,
so you actually pour molten metal into these things to make parts, and that's starting to redefine some parts of the, say, petroleum industry and chemical industry, where you can make very expensive valves and figure out how they're going to work rather than machining tons of steel.
Yeah. Interesting, and that actually leads us on to talking about the trends and the future. It's interesting. I was reading the other day that in 2019, 1.1 billion was raised for startups in the 3D space, 3D prototyping. So clearly, there's a growth in that space. But what do you see as individuals operating in that product development and innovation space see as the future? Where do you see it? Where do you see it going? What's on the horizon? Kate?
Yeah, I think I was reflecting on this actually the other day, and I think a lot of the interesting technologies that we've talked about, certainly in my world, a lot of them have been around for quite a long time in terms of things like the virtual and augmented reality type concepts have been around for a while. A lot of the online collaborative platforms like Miro and Miro have been around for many years. But it often takes a while for these, in the area I work in, it takes a while for these things to sort of seep through and actually be adopted. So I think there's a wealth, like we've talked about, a wealth of technologies that are very exciting. So my hope is that a lot of these will be integrated and used more widely, I suppose, in the next few years. And I think obviously the current challenges we're all going through at the moment has accelerated a huge number of these trends, like collaborative online working and a lot of the more virtual technologies to share ideas with consumers because we can't be face to face. So that in a way that's been quite good. I think I'm quite excited about the future in terms of looking at creativity, and I mentioned before sort of AI tools and apps that could help us be more creative by throwing together interesting propositions or combinations of ideas. So I think there's some really interesting things that might start emerging in that area around how to enhance creativity. So I think we all know creativity is going to be one of the main things that is needed going forward, and seeing that as a tool to help us as humans.
Great, thank you. And Mark, what's you look to the horizon. What do you see on the horizon in the world of 2D and 3D?
Well, in the context of 2D, all the digital printing is being driven by shorter runs compared to printing with rollers, which isn't really lending itself to that. And so that's enabling a lot of the marketing things in terms of campaigns that get people attention, but also the quick change of designs based on shorter run lengths. In 3D, it's a bit different. The drive really is to try and get 3D to be a production method that can be taken seriously as an alternative to subtractive machining. And so a lot of the more innovative stuff is about how you scale it up to be real enough beyond prototyping we spoke about already. And I think there's some of the challenges there of that, although we've got quite good funding in the UK for the digital technologies that underpin the achievement of that in terms of data, there's still not so much funding for manufacturing itself to drive forward those people in the UK who are innovating these things. And there's quite a few people doing it. There are some research centres, but generally speaking, it's just not as well funded as some activities. So if manufacturing is going to reshore and localised manufacturing is going to come about both in terms of 2D and 3D, then investment is needed there, I think. But the technology certainly will continue to enable that to be a concept that can work as the global sort of way we work together as countries in terms of import-export changes.
Great, thank you, Mark. And just to the audience, we're coming up to the Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like the panel to respond to, then please drop them in the Q&A section on the desktop. And Phil, again, same question really, the future looking on the horizon, is it mixed reality for 3D CAD systems?
I think what's interesting is the amount of innovation in CAD. I mean, it's always been progressing very, very rapidly, but now there are so many new tools out there and new ways of doing it. I think I tend to use higher end CAD systems, and they still can be quite clunky. Really, they can create amazing things, but it's very expensive. You need an expensive device to run them on, and they still crash. They still become quite constraining in allowing you to actually design the thing that you want to design. So I think the future really will be about accessibility and ease of use. I think they'll move up into the cloud so that our data is more secure. I mean, we still suffer data crashes and you lose stuff that you're working on. That doesn't happen in Word anymore. That doesn't happen in many other software systems because you just rely on everything being stored and constantly backed up. So I think it'll definitely move more into the cloud, and it'll also moving into the cloud will actually mean that the data is more accessible. Collaboration aspects that we've talked about, but I also think that you'll end up with better version control. my current software is on different licenses and it's different years. So I can use 2016 and 2020 versions of it, but people can't go backwards and forwards and stuff. And it just seems very clunky and old-fashioned in some ways. I think vault systems where you store data and how you lock data down, I think they'll just become ubiquitous. They'll just be the way the CAD is. It'll be in the cloud and you'll be always accessing the latest version and it will all be controlled and all the previous versions will be available. So I think all of that will become automated and we'll start to use things in the cloud where rather than buying one very expensive license, we can rent that one that day and that one that way to do some simulation work or to do some CAD work, and we'll be able to pick and choose what we want and use it when we want to. Kate, you mentioned artificial intelligence a couple of times. That's a big trend in CAD, machine learning, and the ability of the CAD system to kind of predict what we're trying to do and make our designs better and give the knowledge of the whole world into what you're trying to do. It also makes the CAD models more robust as well. At the moment, many of the CAD softwares, they kind of stack one feature on top of another. And if one of the early features fails, everything else fails. Whereas some of the more modern systems, actually, the features are completely independent. You can move them around and you can take them off, you can turn them back on again. And it's much more of a kind of creative process rather than a constraining CAD process. So I think things will move in that way. I think there's going to be much more specialization as well. You can get CAD software now to do architecture or electronics, very specific bits of CAD. There's going to be bits of CAD that allow you to do anything, design your garden shed, all sorts of things. There will be lots more specialist CAD systems and much more task-based ones as well. So, we do simulation, we do flow analysis. There'll be more specialist CAD systems as well, but all available in the cloud, I think.
Great, thanks, Phil. So we've got some questions coming in. So there's a question here for the panel, and it's really around the relationship creation that we touched on earlier. And the question is, how can the Innovation Centre and the Advanced Engineering Hub help with facilitating and supporting collaborative relationships? It has access to established networks, workshops, and online events. What does the panel think would be of value?
I think this event has been, for me, a new thing. And so meeting new people who are working different areas of the industry is very valuable. And you don't know where such things can lead, because we all have links to each other in what we do and how we can achieve them. So I think for the centre, it's enabling more things like this, but where the companies themselves are networking, for example. So just having a networking space, an online networking space, and announcing regular events. Maybe we already do that, but my involvement's fairly new with Set Squared in particular. So that's the kind of thing that I think is valuable, because then you just find links that may prove useful in the future. And otherwise, at least you're socializing, be online, but at least you're meeting new people. And sometimes working in a small business can be very isolating.
And anyone else, Phil?
No, I agree completely with Mark said. It's about connections. The thing is, we're all connected to the World Wide Web, and it's absolutely enormous. So the ability to have something like this where we can focus and connect together, I think, is really important. And it's about those connections and integrations and things that we can do. So meeting new people is always fantastic, and you're always surprising who you find and where you find them, and how you can connect and work together.
And it's still meaningful, even though you're not meeting up in person, that people are nearby. So it's great that I can do a networking event in a conference in Japan, but the fact is, it feels much different than meeting someone who lives in Bristol or Bath. In future times, you can look forward to meeting in person.
Yeah. Another question coming in terms of the leaders in the R&D area of printing 2D and 3D. Do you maybe a question for Mark? Do you see a particular company or people operating in a particular space that are leading from a technology perspective?
There are acknowledged leaders in both spaces, 2D and 3D, from a digital inkjet perspective. And if you go beyond inkjet, then in packaging, HP have a massive interest. But a lot of the people that make your home printers also make industrial printers. So that's Canon, Ricoh, Epson, as well as HP. So all those household names are out there doing industrial printing. And some of those are doing 3D as well. So at least Konica Minolta and Ricoh have 3D printers using materials, usually polymer and usually selective laser sintering rather than inkjet. From the inkjet point of view, in 3D, there are two leaders in the market. The first one is Stratasys, which makes a printer that can now do coloured objects out of different polymeric materials. And they've actually consolidated a lot of other smaller enterprises into their business over the years. The one that's actually got a lot of that funding you talked about, Sean, was Carbon. And they call themselves Carbon 4D. And that's because of the time-based element to their technical advantage. So they don't consider themselves only 3D, but because they save time and it prints fast, they're 4D. And they're people who collaborated with Adidas on the midsoles. So yeah, there are some big players in each case. I tend to work with a spectrum of different organizations, including some of the big ones. But the thought leadership generally is coming from what they're serving their industries and trying to provide what their industry wants. And a lot of the multi-material stuff I talked about earlier is being pulled from them because that's what people want to be able to do. They want to be able to realize designs that aren't just the physical geometry shape. For example, a shoe printed out of gypsum, as we saw in The Apprentice a couple of years ago. Quite cool that you can prototype it that fast, but it doesn't feel like a shoe. And so now you can get closer to that by printing sort of TPUs, which are a bit more flexible, for example. So, yeah, there are leaders out there and they'll continue to be leaders, but new entrants are very important for driving the innovation.
Okay, thank you, Mark. There's a question for Kate, but it's relevant. It'd be interesting to get your views on it as well. In this COVID world, Kate, how are you managing to deliver creative projects globally? Could you just touch on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We a lot of the work we do is multi-market, so we often in a project, so we might work with a global brand and they want to find out what's going on in Japan, what's going on in Brazil. We work with something we've established in the last couple of years is a network of creatives in different countries around the world. So I guess we've been going through that process of building that network, as was the previous question, building relationships with the designers and creatives in different countries. So we're able to have this, I suppose, global network. So from our point of view, we can be based in Bristol, but through all these different platforms we can use now, this network are our eyes and ears on the ground. So when we've got questions or projects, we can send out mini briefs or challenges to different people in different countries. And due to the power of Mural and Miro, you can see these as they're building their sort of capturing photos and stimulus. They're building that content into those platforms, so in real time we can see what they're doing and see what they're generating. So I think, for us actually this virtual way of working has actually been brilliant actually in terms of very, very agile, very fast, very flexible, global reach. I think I agree, it does take a while to build those new relationships, but actually being able to work globally, there's a lot of benefits to doing it that way.
And Phil or Mark, do you have any final points on the COVID, working in the COVID world?
Well, yeah, a lot of my business depended on the travel in order to support implementation at customer sites, and that's evaporated. It's now difficult to get going again because of so much uncertainty, and certainly large companies are taking a very robust approach from a health and safety perspective. So yeah, it's still making things difficult. The tools we've spoken about, digital tools, go a long way to closing a gap on the relationship side. It can't help you fix a piece of equipment and make it work yet, although some people are servicing that way, so doing virtual reality servicing and all sorts of things to try and get printers online again.
Yeah, I mean, we've been running design reviews where we'd normally, in a traditional way, we'd get together around physical product. But what I have been doing is shooting videos and sending packages of the parts to the client so that they can open and experience them at the same time as us. And we can go through a step-by-step approach of reviewing the product and the particular items that we want to review. And what that does actually, it helps actually make the documentation much more robust in terms of the actual points that we've been through, rather than a bit of a bun fight that it can sometimes be in the olden days. So I think people are because of things like Zoom, everybody is so familiar with it now. And even if you haven't done this kind of stuff before, people are used to being on Zoom and being respectful of other people speaking, not all speaking at once. So that everyone sort of adjusted quite well to being able to work online. It's been amazing the way it's happened. And thank God we got all of this during this terrible crisis.
Great. Well, I think that's about it. I think we've run over time. Thank you very much to Mark, Phil, Kate. Appreciate you giving up your time today for this panel. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have, and I hope the participants dialing in have found it interesting and useful. Before we sign off, I would just like to say a thank you to the sponsors of the event, and thank you again to everybody who has signed in today. So that's it. Thank you very much, and see you on the next one.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.